Hello friends, this is David Sami with A Christian Journey. I want to apologize for not loading any videos in these past couple months. I became sick and we just had so many things that came up that really prevented me from loading any videos, but hopefully we get back on track and start loading videos. Again, I want to apologize to all you out there and to our subscribers. But today and for the next few weeks, I want to talk a little bit about our culture, our society. It seems like most of us, we have a sense that things are going in the wrong direction. But what is the cause? Why things just don't seem the way they ought to be anymore? It just seems like our world has gone upside down. And today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what causes humanity to fall away from God. What do we turn to when we fall away from God? What are the steps? And this can apply not only to humanity at large, but also to nations as well as individuals. I think the steps are the same. But what are those steps? And what causes us to move away from God? And also, what are the consequences of falling away from God? Apostle Paul deals with these questions in the book of Romans, chapter 1. Now, we are going to primarily turn our focus to what is applicable to this discussion, which would begin from verse 21. And we read Romans chapter 1, verse 21. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. You know, many times people would ask me, David, what about the person who is on the other side of the world, who has never heard from Jesus? What's going to happen to them? But you know, in reality, all humanity at one point, they knew God as creator through the light of what theologians call general revelation, through creation. Mankind knew God, but they did not glorify or honor him as God or give thanks to him. But the first question that comes to mind, why humanity did not honor God as God? What was the problem? And I think as we go down, we will see this maybe more clearly. I am of the opinion that mankind did not honor God because we do not like and want God for who he is. We like a God after our own image, after our own likeness. And the God of the Bible, we just don't want him. Now this may seem a little harsh or strange, but in reality, mankind does not want the real God. We like to create a God in the way that we want God to be like. And we will see as we go more forward, what do we want and how do we create a God that allow us to do the things that we want to do and not conform to his wishes, to what he says we ought to do. So the beginning point of falling away from God is actually internal, where we begin to not value God as God, even though we have known him, but we begin to move away from him. He become not valuable anymore, and we begin to wander away from him. And as we wander away from him, we don't esteem him as we ought, as our creator, or we are not thankful to him for all that he has done for us, for everything that he has provided for us. Jesus himself says that God lets his sun to shine on the righteous as well as unrighteous, that he has certain amount of benevolence toward all humanity. But when God becomes devalued in our eyes, we gradually lose the attitude of thankfulness for the things that He's doing in our life or He has done. But we begin to wander away with the internal attitude of not valuing God. Now, as we go away from God, what happens? Verse 21, we read, "They became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools." Now, as we wander away from God, it does something to our logic, to our inner reasoning. It makes our inner reasoning to become darkened, that we are not able to see clearly. Even though we profess to be wise, we profess to be intelligent, that we are able to decide correctly for ourselves and lead to a life that we want, in reality, things will go upside down. As a matter of fact, the word futile, it really has the idea of becoming unsuccessful, attempting things that become unsuccessful. It's almost as if we feel like we know what we want and we do away with God, but we allow ourselves to pursue what we think we would lead us to a good life. But in reality, our attempts becomes unsuccessful because there is a way that seems right to us, but the end thereof are just total darkness. And you know what is amazing is even in our own country, we see this today. We are highly intelligent people, but yet the problems that we encounter in our society, the root is moral. What is causing most of our problems today is corruption, lack of morality, lack of clarity. We keep putting Band-Aid on our issues, but the root cause are morals and our values that have been turned upside down. So when we wander away from God, our attempt to lead a good life will become unsuccessful because our internal logic and reasoning has become darkened. We don't see clearly. Now, at this juncture, when we begin to go this far, usually we do two things, two exchanges. The first exchange is found in the verse 23. We read, "They exchanged the glory of immoral God for images resembling mortal man and birds." So in the past, when mankind moved away from God, he began to go into worship of other things, worship of fallen angels, worship of other deity that resembled mortal man, birds, and things of that nature. But those idols were a representation of a way of thinking, a way of having certain values. It was different than God's values, but yet it has its own philosophy and outlook of life. That idol was a representation of a deity that had its own values, had its own way of thinking or doing things. And the second exchange is on verse 25, where we read, "Then they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature or creation rather than Creator." The second exchange is we gradually exchange the truth of God and His moral and religious truth for a lie, for the substitute moral and religious values, whatever we decide to substitute God with. You see, like today, We don't have like idols the way they did in the past. But what do we worship today? We worship our own intellect. We have made science to be our religion of the day, because at one point we felt like science can lead us to utopia, can lead us to the life that we want. But gradually now we are beginning to see crack in those understandings, that maybe science could not deliver what we hope that it was able to deliver. And we today are really, our philosophy of life can be summarized by secularism. Secularism basically means this world is all there is. We cannot go beyond this world to know if there is any other realm, other deities, gods, or anything of that nature. This realm is where we are. This is what matters. But you see how then when we exchange God for other form of belief system, gradually our values shift too. Our values have become more centered on this realm, this world. When we think of, like, say, equality or women's right or racism, all of these are related to this realm. And I am of opinion that in the future, actually ecology and environmentalism would become the religion of the future. That how we treat the environment and planet Earth would be our future ethics. Our morals and values will be based on how we treat the planet Earth and how we react with our environment. So this exchange takes place when mankind leaves God. He doesn't just go into a void. He substitutes God and his values for other things and other values. Now, if we stop here for a second and really even think of our own country, if we put our country in this backdrop so far, does it fit? You see, we were a nation that knew God, but most people would say that in the 60s, we had a cultural shift, that the foundation of our culture began to shift from Christianity to other forms of belief. When we think of the 60s generation, not everyone we are painting with a very big brush, but a lot of people, they began to turn their back on the values and religion of their parents and began to try to go and discover new way of living, new ways of looking at things, new religions, new way of expanding our consciousness to new horizons. And then we gradually became more and more secular. We became more self-reliant, more that we can discover what truths are. We can figure things out, and we can lead to a better life by ourselves. We really don't need God anymore. We are intelligent enough that we can decide what is good or bad for us. But having said all of that, what does mankind turn to when we move away from God, when we replace his values? And then we will see if we went down that road too as a nation. On verse 24, chapter 1, verse 24, the Bible tells us that God gave them over to the desire of their hearts. So there came a point when God says, okay, you insist on going away from me, I give you up to what's in your heart. What do you really want to do? Well, what does humanity wants to do when we move away from God? The first thing it speaks of, he gave them away to impurity. And that word impurity really speaks of not only physical impurity, but moral impurity. that we went after sexual desires. We became morally impure, corrupt. But you see, maybe that's why we did not honor God as God to begin with, because God prohibits us from doing things that are in our own heart, doing things that we want to do. We want to experience sexuality. We want to be able to do what we want to do. But God, it seems to be a hindrance for us to fulfill our own desire the way we see fit. That's why we move away from God, because we don't want this God, but we want a God that allows us to fulfill our desire the way we see fit. And when hands come off, when we begin to move away from God, these are the things that we pursue. Impurity, in a form of physical impurity, as well as moral impurity. But we don't stop there. We gradually go to what the Bible talks about, dishonorable passions. You see, the steps of going away from God does not stop at a certain place, but these steps would get builded on top of one another. That we move away from God, gradually we decide to do what we want to do, but the things that we want to do will go against God and His ways, but we keep insisting on doing, and after a while, that's not enough. We go further, and we keep going further and further and further away from God. Like say in today, having regular sexual relationship outside of the marriage is common. We don't even blink at that. But did we stop there? No. We kept going to more toward homosexual relationship, and now we see a lot of issues with transgender or those kind of things. But what is interesting is, coming back to our own nation, after 60s, in the 70s and 80s, we really went after sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We really went after promiscuity. We wanted to fulfill our own desires the way we saw fit. But not only that, but we begin to decline morally. We begin to gradually just become more corrupt as a society, as people. Now we finally come to a place where we don't see fit to acknowledge God anymore. Slowly, we want God to be completely out of the picture. What's the point? And when we get there, the Bible says that we become filled with all manner of unrighteousness. Now, unrighteousness really has the idea of legal injustice, moral wrongfulness in our character and in our life and in our action. You see, this is a consequence of impurity, moral impurity. We come where our legal system becomes unjust, our society becomes unjust, our character, our life, and our action becomes wrong. We will engage in all kinds of corruptions. We don't exhibit good behavior anymore. We don't exhibit good manners, or our character or our life. They all become contaminated by what is not right. But the thing is, when we go down this road long enough, these things become normal. There are a lot of things that we do today that only 50, 60 years ago was considered unimaginable. This is the action of someone who is immoral. But today, we accept them as the norm because we have become unrighteous. We have become corrupt. It's interesting that many times when I talk to people, many people feel like the problems of the third world country is their form of government. But I have come to the opinion that the problem in those nations is not their form of government, but it's the character of the people that live there. It's their values. It's corruption that causes those cultures to struggle and not be able to move forward in a right way. It's the character of a nation that defines the nation, and it builds that nation, whether for wrong or right. But when we become corrupt, when we cannot tell what is right or wrong, we are on our way to self-destruction. And I feel like this is where we are. We have become, over the years, unrighteous people. Not only in our values, in our politics, in our systems, in our institutions. And slowly, these things are coming to forefront, and we have nothing to say about them. We only accept these things as normal, that this is how it is. And as a matter of fact, the Bible goes on to say that when the people get to this point, it isn't that mankind does not know how God feels about these kind of behaviors or action, but we not only practice them, but we approve of those who practice such a things. So not only we engaged in unrighteous action, but we have no problem when other people do the same thing. This is just the ways of the world. Do you feel like this is where we are as a culture, as a society? Do you feel like we are in a place that if you would come from outside into our society, you will see unrighteousness, you see moral corruption, you see our character being immoral, our words are not trustworthy anymore, we rip other people off, we engage in dishonest business conduct. You see, to me, we see corruption and dishonesty among our politicians, among our business leaders, and in our society at large. And things that were one time considered totally corrupt or unthinkable, it is becoming norm, and we are not hiding it anymore. It has come right out into forefront. But you see, this is the end result of moving away from God. I think it was Dostoevsky where he said, without God, all things become permissible. When we push God out of our society and out of our own life, gradually we can rationalize everything, and everything becomes permissible. That we were not meant to function properly without the real God. And no substitute can take his place. And no substitute values and opinion can take the place of his opinion and his values for our own well-being. But the reason that we don't see it is because our mind and our hearts are darkened. Our internal reasoning is not what it ought to be. Our logic is upside down. Many times I've talked to people that are atheists or don't believe in God, or at one time maybe they have, but now they no longer believe or espouse to the even idea of God. And they feel like the problem is the lack of proof, that if there was enough proof, we would believe God. But the problem is not in our mind. The problem is in our heart. It's in our logic. Because internally, we are darkened. Our logic is upside down. And in reality, we don't want God. Or at least the God that has revealed himself in the Bible. We may like a God, But we want that God to allow us to do as we choose, as we please. As a matter of fact, C.S. Lewis said something that I think is profound and interesting. He said, we do not want God to be a father, but we like God to be a senile grandfather. An old man who keeps telling us, turn the other cheek, it's okay, we all make mistakes. So we create a fictional God. Or no God at all. If we are honest with ourselves and we wander away from God, why bother? Or we embrace values that we enjoy. But those values better not interfere with what we want to do. That's when those values become problematic. But in the next time, we want to talk a little bit more about our culture, because I feel like we have moved away from a Christian culture and we are going to another form of culture, maybe a monoculture, a culture that is going to be accepted worldwide. Now that new culture would have its own 10 commandments, would have its own values. But maybe right now we are in a transition period. And within this transitional period, we feel like that new culture would allow us to do as we please. But that's an illusion. Because once we get here, we would see that this culture would have its own values and it will enforce its values upon us. But they're not going to be Christian values, but they're going to be different. And maybe we are in a transitional period. So, again, if you like the content, please consider subscribing, where we talk about Christian values, Christian things, all things Christian, but also just try to see things from God's point of view. So if these are some of the things that you may be interested in, again, please consider subscribing and come along with us. And let me know your thoughts on the comments below. Do you feel like as a nation, this is where we are? Do you feel like these are the steps that we have taken to end up where we are? That does this description of how mankind goes away from God, does it fit our nation? And have we gone to the same steps? Or where are we at? Are we to the place that not only we practice unrighteousness, but we approve of those who do the same thing? So, again, let me know your thoughts on the comments. But until next time, may the Lord be with you. May He watch over you. May He make His face to shine upon you. This is David Sami with The Christian Journey.